So, here we are. It's taken over a solid day's worth of video to talk about all of the games leading up to this point. I have spent over 24 hours talking about 499 games individually and talking about my experiences with each one of them. Now, granted, some of them were clumped together, which means that I may not have spoken about those ones individually in particular, but still I have talked about 499 games. And this series has taken a long time to make. Making the list itself was a very long process and it took a lot of time and a lot of work. And I kind of built up this vision of what it would be like to finally make this series, and it has taken several months from recording that episode where I started the list at number 500 talking about Motocross Madness and Cookie Clicker and Altered Beast and Rascal, and I have just progressed through all of those games that mean so much to me throughout my entire life so far. And some people would say that I have impeccable memory when it comes to certain things. I know there are people who say that I do have a very good memory, and to be honest, I think I do have a good long-term memory. I think my short-term memory isn't as good, really. But yeah, it's meant a lot, this series, and I can't believe it's finally going to come to an end. But this is the moment that everyone has been waiting for, because whenever you have a top list, whether it be top 10 or top 100, there's always that question of what's going to be number one, and there's always like a big build up to it. And I never really wanted to make it this big thing where it's like only the number one matters, because no, the other 499 games, trust me, they do matter in some shape or form. But this is it. We are at the number one game. So let's go on with it. Let's talk about what my favourite game is. You may think that there's some sort of deep and interesting story about how I discovered this game. Maybe a friend had it and I was interested, or maybe it just caught me by surprise out of nowhere. Or maybe it was one I was anticipating coming out for a while. But to be honest, the story behind this particular game isn't very exciting how I discovered it, because what happened was one day my granddad came over and he brought for us a box of copied PS1 games, because that's what he did. He always brought some PS1 games, usually on Christmases and birthdays, but I think this was just one of those occasions where he just had some for us. And this was simply one of the games in that box. And so it is very unlikely that one of those games would turn out to be my favourite game of all time. Now, how long did it take for it to become my favourite? It did take quite a while, actually. It wasn't my favourite game straight away, and in fact, the game rather confused me. It did entice me from the start, but it did rather confuse me, and I didn't really understand. But I got this game, and me and my brother, we had to go and get our hair cut on that same day. So I started it. I didn't really play much, but I started it, and I think I managed to save. I don't remember. And we went to the nearby shops to get our hair cut at the hairdressers, which isn't there anymore because there was an incident with a fire. But when it was there, that's where we went. And there was one moment when my brother was inside getting his hair cut, and I was outside just playing on the rails because, of course, I was bored, and my friend Matthew happened to walk past. And I told him about this game, and he didn't really understand it from the way that I tried to describe it to him. And to be fair, I didn't understand it either, but I tried to describe it to him, and he later came over to my house and I tried to show it to him, or rather I did show it to him. And it was rather complicated. It seemed like a game that was a bit too highbrow for me, I suppose. It felt like it was too advanced for me to understand. Now, this happened before he showed me Final Fantasy VIII, and I suppose this kind of puts a bit of perspective on things because he showed me Final Fantasy VIII, and as you know, I was absolutely amazed by it. And so when I borrowed Final Fantasy VIII from him, I let him borrow this game because you have to remember at the time I was more interested in Final Fantasy VIII. And then when I came back from the holiday, I was still on Final Fantasy VIII just fighting Grats in the training area. He was playing this game and he was telling me about all these things that he discovered. And I was really interested to see all of these different things that he had discovered. And later on, when I got the game back, we started playing this game a lot more. I think he maybe got the game for himself. I don't really remember. But what I do remember is that we would spend a lot of time in my room and he would watch me play a lot and I would watch him play a lot as well when he brought over his memory card, and we used to do these things where we used to like take turns singing the different music for the different parts of the game, and we were always so enticed by the game, and I'd always say to him, I found this new thing, and then later on he'd say to me, I found out this new thing. And we had a lot of fun playing this game, and I really did enjoy this game. But it was many years down the line where I actually decided to get the game for myself, like an actual non-copied version that could work on my PS2 at the time, because I hadn't played it for a while and I wanted to play it again. So I went and bought it from Amazon for £40, I think it was, and the more that I played it, whilst yes, I was reliving these memories and really getting into this game just from what I knew, I kept discovering even more stuff as time went on. And the more that I played and the more that I discovered, I started to really notice some very nice intricacies about this game that I didn't notice before. And I started coming up with different strategies that I didn't use before. And I really started to just get so much more into this game. And it was probably not until 2007 or so where I thought to myself, you know what? I think this is probably the best game I've ever played. I mentioned previously also how when playing the original Suikoden game, as my friend Josh liked to call it, I borrowed it from him, and during that time I mentioned that he borrowed the game from me, and this game is the game that he borrowed from me. And I also remember when I was talking about Suikoden, I was also saying that he got really lucky and he started doing things in a really fantastic way that just never really happened that way for me. And that is just, again, quite a testament to how good this game is. And throughout the years of having played this game and just falling in love with it and just enjoying every second of it, I have come across a few people, mostly online, who have heard of this game and played it. The common reception is very mixed. There are those who don't like it at all. They have a lot of negative things to say about it. Well, they say a lot of things as if they are negative. But there are also this other group of people who I have met one in real life as well, and I'm going to use in real life basically to mean offline here, but I have met one person offline who said, oh yes, that game is amazing, and of this subset of people that think this game is amazing, I am absolutely one of them. You know when you get people who it's kind of like there is one game that you associate with them and them alone? I kind of feel that this is the game for me. Although I suppose there are a few other games that people would associate with me stronger, such as Rainbow Moon, which I do absolutely love, and Final Fantasy V as well, which I do absolutely love. But I think that if you were to pick out one game to associate for me, which is the game that I love the absolute most, because it is my favourite game of all time, it would have to be this game right here. My favourite game of all time. Well, let's take a look. My favourite game of all time is Azure Dreams for the PlayStation. And oh my goodness, where do I start with this game? I think I'll just start by telling you some of the backstory, just give a bit of the premise behind what the game is about. So, there exists a monster tower which is full of riches and different artifacts that really attract adventurers, and so the village that resides just outside of this tower brings in its economy through all these wandering adventurers travelling to the town so that they can go into the tower hoping to get their riches, as well as finding monster eggs that they can use to either sell for a profit or hatch into monsters that will become their own familiars. Ko, the main character, is a resident. He's a born resident of this town, and the game starts with you just being born, and it is established that you are of a rather poor family. But your father, Guy, becomes well known for being one of the best monster tamers in the land. But unfortunately, one day there is something going on top of the tower, and it's very hard to make out what it's actually meant to be happening. Clearly, it's some sort of magic spell, and this draws the attention of a lot of the town's residents. And this worries Wreath, who is Ko's mother, that her husband is in danger, and soon after, Guy's familiar returns home to deliver the bad news that Guy didn't make it back safely. And so the game starts when Ko turns 15, and it is now time for him to go into the monster tower, because he is now old enough, he is legible to go in, but he is inexperienced, and of course your mother is very worried because, you know, she lost her husband to that tower, but because of the way the economy works, you are going to need to go there in order to provide for the family. That's the idea. And the game does really emphasize this theme of wealth and riches and just those types of values. In fact, this is very much shown by the character Ghosh, who is the main rival to Ko, and he is basically a spoiled rich kid who will be very rude and dismiss you outright for simply not being as rich as he is. But on this day, when Ko turns 15, you'll be woken up by the priest, and he will give you some information as to how the tower works. And the tower is basically the vast majority of the gameplay element of this game. He explains that it's a randomly generated dungeon. He explains that you can go up floors but you can't go down. He explains about the different monsters. He explains about the familiars. He explains about how when a familiar levels up, it will maintain its level, but when you level up, you will not maintain your level. You will reset to level 1 every time you re-enter the tower. He explains how you're only allowed up to 5 items when you're entering the tower, and all of those different types of rules. But when you go to enter the tower for the first time, you will be approached by, and this is just how I pronounce his name, Cuny, who will inform you that since you're very new to the whole thing, he'll need to be your guide. And so you enter, and for the first floor, for the first time, he will give you the lowdown on the controls and how to save your game and all of that sort of stuff. And from that point on, the game treats story as sort of like a side project, like a side development thing, as opposed to the main feature of progressing through the game. Because when you do complete the game, as in you do reach the top of the tower, there is of course some story development, which would be huge spoilers, so I'm not going into any of that. But aside from that, all of the story is optional. All of the story, aside from that, is just stuff that happens in the town as you go around and you talk to the different residents. Because they will hate you straight up. They do not like you. They think you're a little brat. They don't value you as a customer because they don't believe you can afford anything, and so they are just mean to you. But as you play through the game and as you acquire more riches, you can use those riches to improve the town, and what ends up happening is that the residents start appreciating you a lot more, and this becomes a stark contrast to the character of Gosh, who doesn't develop at all because he's just always rich. And this allows the characters to sort of come to a realization that what they value is the ethics that people hold. And I think the best example of this is that there is one scene in particular where Nico is fundraising for a fountain to be built, and Gosh will always donate more than you do as a way of showing off. I'm not talking about that scene, but later on in the game, when this fountain is built, there will be a cello player who is playing music on the fountain, and Nico is a big fan of this music, so she praises it. However, Gosh is not happy, because the way that he sees it is that this is Nico's fountain, and how dare you play that awful music on Nico's fountain. And then she goes off on one saying about how it's not her fountain, it's everyone's, and that really spits in the face of the backwards morals that these characters have established. But the town itself is where you will be spending the vast majority of your money. So, for example, you will contribute towards paying for a theatre, or an improved library, or a horse racing track. And so you will help to boom the economy, whereas Gosh, he's just there being rich, showing off how rich he is, and not contributing to anyone. So that's how the theming is of Azure Dreams, but let's get to the meat of this. Let's talk about the tower, because let me tell you, this is just fantastic. So you can enter the tower with up to 5 items total. Familiars are included in that item list, so you might want to bring in 5 familiars, or a familiar, a pit of fruit, a sword, and 2 other things, or any combination of 5 items that you would want to bring in. Whatever items you don't bring in, you would have to keep them in your home safe, and your home safe increases in size the more that you buy a bigger home. And your familiars, you have a den where you keep your familiars, and it starts off as just a 2x2 grid for you to put your familiars into, and you can upgrade that by spending the money to increase it to a 3x3 grid, so you've got space for 9 familiars, and then a 4x4 grid so that you can hold 16 familiars, and so on and so forth. You can hold up to 20 items at any one time, and you can bring in 5 items with you. You start the dungeon at level 1 every time, so the progress that you make throughout the game, the ideal growth that you will gain by playing through this game, is having 5 better items when you enter the tower. Now, familiars themselves, they level up, so obviously if you're gonna use a familiar, they'll level up and they'll get stronger every time. Or you might find more effective weapons. If you die, you lose all of the items in your current inventory, but you keep your familiars and they maintain their levels. So if you die whilst you're in the tower, you can either just continue, accept that you've lost all those items that you had with you, and continue on with a higher leveled familiar, or familiars rather if you brought multiple in, or you can restart to when you saved previous to that, so that you will keep the items that you had brought into the tower with you, but not the levels for the familiars. It's sort of like a choose your punishment sort of thing. The way that you escape from the dungeon is by using wind crystals, and wind crystals are a rather common item that you will find throughout the tower. The tower works strictly on a roguelike type system, where you take a step and everything else takes a step. If you attack, then everything else will either take a step or attack. It's basically turn-based, but it's sort of simulated in such a way that you can walk in a straight line and enemies will just do their thing as you're walking around. So you might have like an enemy following you, and if you take 1 step to the left, they'll take 1 step to the left. That sort of thing. Your familiars are basically monsters that you can tame. If you find a monster egg in the tower, you can bring that back to your home and then hatch the egg, and then that will just be yours to keep. Or you can hatch the egg whilst in the tower, which means that it will start at a higher level, but the downside to that is that you will lose the familiar once you exit that tower run. And so you've got to think of it in terms of different runs of the tower. Different monsters through the game will be one of 3 different elements, or genuses as they call them in this game. They'll either be a fire genus, a wind genus, or a water genus. And so it does the rock paper scissors thing, so fire is better than wind, and wind is better than water, and water is better than fire. And not all of the monsters, but some of them have their own magic. So for example, Cuny, who is the familiar that you get at the start, has Brid, which is a basic fire attack. And in fact, each different genus has its own theme to it. So for example, the fire genus, those spells are based on damage. So you'll have Brid, Sled, Breath, and these are all like attacking spells, just do damage. Now because spells cost MP and a lot of MP, even if you're attacking a water monster, it still does a lot of damage. The wind genus is more about status effects. So for example, a clown has low down, which is to level down other enemies, and you have low bind, which will paralyze, and then low blind, which will blind whoever it's targeting. As for the water genus, that's all about healing. So you might have deheal, for example, or something like that, or deforth. But each monster only has spells of its own genus, and so if you change the genus of a monster, its spells will change genus with it, and if you have a spell that's not in its original genus, then that is what is called an isotope. And you can always tell the difference between what it was originally and what it is, and if it's an isotope or not. If it's an isotope, the icon will be displayed outside of a box, whereas normal magic spells are inside a box. And so, for example, Lowdown, which is a level reducing wind spell, if you change it to fire or water, it'll become something like Ladown or Leedown, and they are basically weaker versions of it. So one of them will only reduce strength and one of them will only reduce defenses. And it's the same with like Brid. The lack of prefix means it's a natural fire spell, but then if you change the genus, it'll become Neobrid or Neobrid, which will make it weaker. Monsters also have their own unique abilities and traits. So for an example, an ability is something that that type of monster can do that no other type of monster can. So for example, a U-boat, one of the things that a U-boat can do is sink underground so that it can't be attacked, but it has to then come back out in order then to attack. It can also scout so that you can have the full map revealed for you. Then you have pickets who can steal. That's just a thing that pickets can do. They can steal items. A stealth, for example, can turn invisible. A Garuda can grab a monster and teleport them, or rather throw them away to another point on the map. So they might do that to your familiar. And there's all sorts of these different abilities that specific monsters can do. But then there's also traits. And a trait is something that is specific to that monster but can be carried over onto other monsters as well, such as a Napless, which has double HP but will occasionally fall asleep, and you also have a Dreamin, which is immune to sleep. And the way that these can carry over is that when you have two familiars, you can fuse them together, and so it will kind of transfer spells and possibly traits as well over from one of your familiars onto another. So say for example you have a Manueva, and the Manueva has an ability to transform into other things. You can have them transform into other types of enemies, but say if you want them to have double defense, you can fuse a block that is a monster called a block who naturally has double defense as one of their traits onto the Manueva, and then the Manueva will have double defense as well as the ability to transform, because the ability to transform is one of its own specific abilities. It's not a trait that can be carried over, and there are certain very good combinations for this type of thing. So for example, a stealth has the trait that it is unaffected by rust traps, and a rust trap lowers the effect of weapons, and stealth monsters can't hold weapons, but troll monsters can. So if you have a troll, you can fuse a stealth onto it so that its weapon can't rust. And so you get all sorts of these different combinations of enemies, and whilst it may appear that sometimes a lot of the fights come down to attack, 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 that is true, but there are a lot of these hidden extra things that make different monsters different to each other, and the game isn't so much about what it's like to fight a thing, it's about the arduous journey of finding the best way to avoid enemies when you're on critical HP and that sort of stuff. But let's talk about items. A lot of the items just do a thing for the most part. So for example, a medicinal herb will heal some HP, and a Tumna fruit will turn a monster into a frog, which you can use to throw at the enemy to turn them into frogs. But some of them have extra little effects to them. So for example, a Pitta fruit recovers a monster's HP by 50, so you can give that to one of your familiars. But if that familiar is at max MP, instead of recovering its MP, it will increase its max MP by 1. And this is important because monsters, familiars, don't recover MP naturally. They use it all the time and they need MP for everything, even moving. So if they run out of MP, they're basically dead, unless you can recover that MP. And they don't gain MP when they level up, unless they are a particular type of monster where its innate trait is that it gains MP when it levels up. And you can change how much MP your familiars will consume by changing their AI, because AI has 5 different modes that you can switch between. So for example, if you get them just to stand there and not do anything, they won't use up their MP. But if you get them to back up your attacks with magic, then that will use up more MP, and if you get them to attack themselves, that uses up even more MP. But a lot of the items also have unknown factors about them as well. So if you get an item where the text is in green, that means there is an unknown effect to it. So for example, a magic ball. Say you pick up a fireball, it will have the power to unleash a fireball to hit the enemy. Very powerful. But if text is in green, that means that it isn't clear how many charges it's got. So you might use it, and then later on you might think, I should probably use this fireball attack thing, but you don't know if it has any charges left, so you use it at the risk of just wasting your turn. Although there are items you can find that will help reveal this information, and this information will be revealed when you exit the tower, although it might not be useful at that point. But this also applies to weapons, because weapons might be cursed where you can't take them off and their attack power or defense is reduced and you have to uncurse them to take them off. Or it might be that they have an extra bonus to their strength or defense, and you can use red and blue sand, depending on whether it's a sword or shield, to boost it even further, and you can also use white sand on the magic balls to increase their amount of charges. And so you can build up a really good arsenal of weapons and magic balls to use, kill all these enemies with. And of course you have the best weapons in the game, such as the gold sword, which is the weakest sword at the start, but it isn't affected by rust traps, so it can't go down. Diamond shield as well isn't affected by rust traps, and I haven't talked about traps yet, have I? Traps are basically things that you can find as you're playing the game, just as walking around. Things can just happen. You might land on something which will explode and hurt you, or worst possible scenario, or best possible scenario, depending on the situation, you might walk into a monster den where suddenly you are surrounded by 20 enemies that weren't there before. A lot of people find this game to be a very hard game, and I've got to say that throughout the years that I have played this game, I have certainly improved my skills on this game. And I think it really helps to detract the notion that people have that if a game uses random generation or something like that, then that means that skill is less involved because there is more randomness involved. And just because there is some randomness there, that doesn't mean that you can't get better at the game by learning and understanding the fundamental rules that govern those random elements and increasing your ability to know when to take risks and when to play it safe. And I think that this game is an absolutely fantastic game at doing those types of things. And even today, if I play it, I'm going to encounter situations where the best course of action is not necessarily clear, because as good as you can get at this game, and as much as you can understand the intricacies of each individual monster or item or trap or whatever, things will just happen in such a strange combination that you haven't seen before, and you will be led with some scenarios that you have never seen before, regardless of how long you have played this game, at least from my experience, and I can give some examples of this. There was one time when I walked into a room which turned out to be a monster den, so suddenly I found myself surrounded by a load of enemies and I had to find a way to find my way out of it. And so this is the point where you open up the menu and you carefully examine the items that you've got and you plot out a way of how to get out of the situation. And there was one time where I managed to surround myself and my familiar with these invincibility shields and allow the enemies to circle around us as we attack them off one by one. There was one time when I managed to use a holy bell, which causes the monsters to try to get out of the room, which in this case there is a room with only one exit to it. So as a result, all these monsters were desperately trying to like get out of the room, and as they were out of the room and out of the Holy Bell's area of effect, they were desperately trying to get in but not being able to, and as a result they kind of just lined up and let me kill them off one by one. There are times where you will look into your inventory and you will see you have some items such as an egg on a floor that you hadn't reached before, and you'll be fighting an enemy and you will be thinking to yourself, oh my god, do I try attacking them again, or do I just use a wind crystal and get out of here? And it can be really tense. And getting to those higher floors, I mean even not high floors, but just higher than what you've been, and seeing these new enemies roaming around, it can be terrifying. And it's just the amount of stuff that happens as I play this game, and the amount of weird combinations, and just the amount of stuff that I learn about all of the intricacies of each of the different monster types. And in some cases, discovering items that I didn't know existed. Like, there is an item in this game that I know about that I don't think I've ever seen. I think I've seen it like online, like like a website dedicated to the game talking about it, but I don't think I've seen it, and it took me years to discover the Russia fruit. And in fact, I think throughout my entire time playing this game, I have maybe had like 2 or 3 Russia fruits, and I have owned 1 Barong monster as a familiar throughout my entire time playing this game. Oh, Barongs. They are so incredibly awkward to get, but they have a trait that makes your leveling up more effective. I just love this game, and I can't sing its praises enough. I think the fact that I have talked about this game in particular so much more than any other game is really a sign as to just how much I love this game. And I know I said that I don't want to make it sound like that this is the only game that matters on this list, as if I have been spending this whole time just to get to this point, because I do want to make it clear that all of those other games, especially like the ones in the top 100, really do mean a lot to me, and I'm really happy to have played them. My favourite game of all time is, without a doubt, As Your Dreams. And so that concludes my top 500 games. Thank you everyone who has stuck here from the start. I truly, truly appreciate it. And I am just so happy to say that I can't believe I finally finished making this series. I had planned this series for a good few years now, but I never really got round to it. And making the list itself and getting it all sorted took a very, very long time. But this is potentially not the end of the series. It's the end of the list, but potentially not the end of the series, because as you are listening to this right now, things may be different, but as I am recording this, I have a few bonus episodes in mind that I may or may not do. I'm not too sure. one thing I need to do is I need to go back to episode 1 and talk about things from the start. So I'll need to like go back in time to episode 1, as you already know because you should have listened to episode 1 by now. But yeah, I am going to plan to have a few bonus episodes, but I'm not going to work on them straight away, I don't think. Basically, once I've got this episode done and I've got the series checked and fully made, I am then going to go back in time to my first episode and finish that off. And then once I've done that, check the entire series, make sure everything's in working order, and then start releasing this. So as you're hearing this, obviously it's far in the future to when I'm recording this. And yeah, I plan to have a few bonus episodes, which may be up straight away. I don't know yet as I'm recording this. We'll have to find out closer to the time. But I'm going to try to include certain things in bonus episodes, such as I would like to talk about how I made the list and like the process I went through and how I made the videos and how I recorded them and all that. I want to talk about games I've played since I started making the list and all that, because of course there's some games I've played between starting the series and finishing the series, and of course there's going to be even more games in between me starting the series and this series being fully uploaded for everyone to watch. So yeah, I'm going to talk about, because I plan to talk about those games that I haven't had a chance to talk about here because I hadn't played them at the time. I also want to talk about a few errors that I've made because I know that as I've gone back and rewatched these, there are a few minor errors that I have said, not big things like misplacing a game in one place when I meant to put it somewhere else. I just mean things like saying the word red when I meant to say blue, things like that. And also, unfortunately, just down to the complexity and the scope of this list, there have been a few games, I'd say. As far as I'm currently aware, there's about 4 or 5 games that I have played and I know I've played, and I just haven't included them in this list because they went under the radar as I was making the list, which is unfortunate, but that's just how things have to turn out. And of course, I also want to talk about some games that I have played, but I just didn't feel like I had the confidence to really rank. And so I plan to have a little bit of a break right now in terms of this, which I might do, I might not do, which me saying this is totally irrelevant to you right now because as far as I'm concerned, you are listening to this far ahead in the future. But I'm speaking as I'm recording this. It's been a long journey and I look forward to everyone watching this series. And I am just thrilled to have finally got it done. So thank you all for watching. I will see you all next time.